All right, so what we're going to talk about is a bamboo fire saw. And this is probably as close as you can get to rubbing two sticks together. You know, we always hear about rubbing two sticks together for fire. Aside from a fire plow, you know, this is about as simple as it gets. For me, the beauty of this is that everything that you need to do this fire is in one piece of bamboo, including the tinder. So this is how I found this bamboo in a stand of bamboo. There's a huge thicket, and I walk in there, and you oftentimes find it standing dead, and it has a tendency to want to split like this. So it's already busted open. So that lends itself to what we call the split stick method, which is we just follow what the bamboo naturally wanted to do. We just kind of come in there and we'll assist that split along the lines that it wanted to do naturally. And so we have the two halves of bamboo. Where we get our tinder from with this, we have two options. We can come on the inside here, and if we drag our knife across it, you see that I get some really, really fine, almost hair-like curls. So this is what I like to use for my initial tinder. Once we make the notch, I try to put this directly behind the notch so that that's my initial contact with the dust that will ultimately become the coal. The sharper your knife is and the lighter the pressure of your hand, the finer that this stuff can become. And so you'll want to scrape a good amount of that together. One thing we're going to do with this tinder also, instead of leaving it really loose, is we're going to pack it down. Because if you leave it too loose, the dust just tends to move through it, and there's no limit of advance, and it really doesn't become a coal because the dust is all over the place instead of being channeled into one spot where it can self-insulate. And so that's your process for getting your primary tinder. And then your secondary tinder, you can see kind of the texture. If you want to pass that around, everybody look at how fine it is. Smell the aromatic bouquet, enjoy the ambiance of it. When we go to the outside, I'm going to utilize the same technique, but what do we immediately notice about the tinder? It's bigger. And so this obviously would be our secondary tinder. It's what we would put around the finer tinder for more mass, for more insulation. Just like you would a tinder bundle in your hand, you put your best stuff in contact with the coal and the bigger stuff just for bulk and mass so that you have something to hold that coal in there with. And so you can make a good nest of this for yourself. And if the bamboo is standing dead, even in the rain, once you scrape past that initial membrane, what's underneath is usually bone dry, which is, if you're going to use a ferro rod or a lighter or some other method, solar ignition, you know, it's good to know how to source tinder from the bamboo, because you can see this doesn't take a lot of work or a lot of time to come up with a pretty good amount of it. And so there's the secondary tinder, and I normally will crush it down really, really tight, so I end up with a lot less than what I initially had, and that's enough to really hold my coal. That initial tinder, as it made its way around, you still have it. Okay, when it gets back around, I'll just add that to this. So the next steps are the two pieces. The way that this thing works is we're going to have one piece, we're going to lock it in the ground, put it up against a tree. You can have a buddy hold it, you can put pegs in the ground, there's all types of options to stabilize it. But we're going to actually sharpen one of these sections between the nodes, and then we're going to make a notch adjacent to a node, because we have this little wall in the middle where the node is, and it has more structural integrity there. If there were no nodes in this and I just squeezed it, it would snap in half. And so the wall helps to maintain that structural integrity. So we want to put our notch pretty close to a node on either side, and then the tinder will go directly behind that, and we'll take a long piece of grass, cord, bark, whatever you have to hold that in place with our thumbs, and then we're going to rub the length between these two nodes, which is important because when you're first selecting your bamboo, you'll notice the length of pull between these two nodes is much less than these here. So when I'm selecting the bamboo, it's critical that you think in terms of how much length of pull do I have, right? And that is about optimal, you know. I've got pretty big hands, a little greater than a hand's length. It is about as small as I want to be. This can be done, but it's probably on the smaller side. So to sharpen, what we want to do is, where we've split the bamboo, there's almost two really hard angles there. And so I'm just going to remove that inner angle. And when I say sharpen it, I don't want to sharpen it to the point that I'll cut myself, and you can cut yourself on this bamboo. I've done that. I'm thinking more in terms of butter knife sharp. And what we're doing is we're concentrating, instead of a wide thing, we're kind of rounding it off. We're concentrating that pressure so that when we're rubbing, we're not getting friction on the sides. The friction is happening on the front and back of our notch as we pull. And that'll make more sense to you once we make the notch. So I'm just going to remove some of this material on the inside like that. And then I'm going to kind of look at it, and that still looks a little wide to me, so I'm going to take a little more.
Alan, what kind of measurement?
Yeah, think of a butter knife sharpness. You know, I don't want it to be, because you can sharpen this stuff to where it literally will cut you. So you don't want the two angles to come together like a knife's edge. You want them to come together like almost a knife edge, but with just a little roundedness or flatness at the top. Thickness, that's a good point. And there are different species of bamboo, and depending on where you are in the world, some of them are really huge and the walls are paper thin, and some of them are amazingly thick, and those thicker ones are not going to be as good for making the fire. Generally ones like this, you know, where you're looking at 1/4 of an inch or so, somewhere in that neighborhood, is about optimal. I've used other ones, and a lot of that comes down to your notch. You have to really kind of learn to finesse your notch. So that's about what we're looking for on the sharpness. And I'll pass that around. So it's the center node. You'll take notice of how it looks here versus how it looks in the middle. So that's half of the kit made. So for the next step, I want to go for a notch. I want to think about holding it with both hands like this. So obviously this is kind of in thirds, so I'm going to be holding it here, or I'm going to be holding it here. So I'm going to examine the piece. I don't want any cracks there if I can help it. I want something that looks fairly robust. These are both equal, so I'll just choose one. So what we're looking for on the notch is we want it to be like this. Really, really wide and really shallow. I don't want steep sides like this. The reason for that, as I mentioned with the sharpening process, I don't want friction on the sides. I want frictions on the front and the rear. I want it on the push and I want it on the pull. I'm going to get some sidewall friction, but I want to minimize it. Now, the reason for that is, with this thing split like it is, when I really lean in on it, it's going to slightly flex. And that's why I'm taking the time to sharpen it and make sure my notch is really forgiving, because when I lean in on this and that flex happens, what's going to happen to my friction? It's going to increase. It's actually going to almost bind itself if I'm not careful. And so that is something crucial to think about. So when we start our notch, I want to start on the highest point, dead center of this half. If I'm over here, then I'm not going to have as much time. And I also want to avoid taking away more material than is necessary, because the more material I take away with my knife, the less material is there to be ground away by friction, which is the whole point of this thing. And so just take your time. Notice I work one side and then I'll flip it and work the other side. I'm just going to remove a little material until I come to a point where a line will start to establish, and then I'll try to stay with that line. And I want to do this just to the point that I break through the membrane. That's to say, on the inside of the bamboo, I just come through with my knife, or I can just see some daylight through there. I'm going to stop at that point, because if I take more with my knife, then that robs me of potential time going for the fire. And so with all the friction fire methods we've covered today, there are some truisms that translate regardless of technique. And one thing I like to say about friction fire, if it were to be written out like a mathematical equation, proper materials plus proper technique equals success. That's true of a bow drill, it's true of a hand drill, it's true of any method that you could name. If you have the correct materials and you utilize the correct technique, you will have fire. And I like to always honor my teachers. So the first human that I saw do this was Forrest Hillier. And then the man that actually taught it to me, his name is Al Cornell. He lives up in Sedona, Arizona. And I actually learned this technique in the desert. And he said something to me the day he was teaching me this, because this is a very labor-intensive method. You're using a lot of big muscle groups, and there's just a lot of vigor that goes into this. He says you have to sneak up on the fire. And what he meant by that was we just don't go all in as soon as we start, because we're not really going for a fire at that point. We're seeing if it fits, we're feeling the friction change, we're building up heat, we're sweating out moisture. Think of it as a transmission changing gears. I've been in first gear and now I'm ready for second, then I'm ready for third. And you just increase by degrees. Another truism of all friction fire is that there's a communication between you and the material. The wood will talk to you. It'll talk to you through the way it feels, it'll talk to you through the way it smells, and it'll give you visual feedback in the form of smoke. So once you see that thing smoking, it's basically saying to you, I'm ready if you are. And that's when you want to kick it into high gear, when you start seeing a good steady stream of smoke, and you'll see discoloration on that edge that we sharpen, and you'll even see ashes start to fall out of it. You'll see black dust coming out. That's the wood communicating to you that it's time to go all in. And like most other methods, you probably experienced it today, sometimes it's tempting to stop short, right? We think, oh, I'm tired and that's close enough. And then we stop and we find, well, we don't have a coal. That's probably more true with this method than any other method. And so what you want to do with this technique is you want to start off nice and smooth. Once everything's fitting good, it feels right, you want to increase those speed and pressures. And once you see smoke, constant smoke, dense smoke, you want to go all in. And by all in, I mean you want to go to the point of fatigue. TMF, total muscle failure. Because if you try this half-heartedly 2 or 3 times, you'll be done with it. You'll be gassed out. The other thing is we have a limited amount of material here. So the best I've been able to do is about 2 fires out of 1 notch, and then this process starts over again, which I would take over here to the other side of the node. I might cheat another one here and another one here, but I definitely have a limited amount of time with this piece until I'm going to have to go select another piece. So taking the time to make it fit right is time well spent. Because this is like all the things you've seen today, a bow drill, a hand drill, they are all machines. We don't think of it that way, but these are primitive machines, no different than the engines in our vehicles that brought us here. It's just that they're primitive, and the engine that drives them is a human being and the human being's muscles. And so our muscles have to be oxygenated to perform correctly. So it's important also that we breathe. Take a few deep breaths, really oxygenate your muscles before you even start. And then don't forget to breathe while you're actually doing the technique. A lot of people treat this like a really intense bowel movement. They stop breathing. And you see them turn purple, and I'm like, breathe, you're gonna die. So don't do that, make sure you breathe. So I'm just working that sidewall, trying to get a lot of that material. I'm trying not to go deep, I'm trying to go wider. And notice I'm flipping it over and looking at it, because if I come to the point where I've broken through, I'm going to have to really watch what I'm doing at that point and focus even more on the sides and less on the depth. So I'm really have to be cognizant of that. And I feel like I'm getting pretty close too. And once I have the notch done, I'm going to pass it around so that you can see what it is that we're going for here. And I'm not getting in any hurry at all with this. Just like the notches on your bow drill, your hand drill, that's time well spent. Because you can have an inefficient kit and go in there and work really hard physically trying to make it happen and not have success, or you could just take your time and burn less energy and do it right once. And it's all about efficiency, and it's all about calories, and we have to just really take time and do things the right way. It's one thing that's wrong with our culture. Everything's so fast, and I just barely have broken through. I just saw a peak of daylight there. And so this thing terminates where there's kind of a line there, and that's what I wanted. I feel like I have a little mass there that needs to come away. Just going to polish that. So the beauty in this, you know, you got 2 pieces of wood and you have your tender all in this one section of bamboo. So the simplicity of it to me is beautiful. So that's the notch. That's the part that's going to correspond to that sharpened edge that I showed you earlier when I passed that part around. And is this both piles of our tender joined together? And the
little guy's just sitting on top.
Yeah, do you feel okay with that? He's actually going to do the rubbing. I'm just here for moral support and to talk about stuff. Because of my advanced age and my bad back, I'll let my younger son handle it. And see, like I was saying earlier, this piece of bamboo has no node in it. So if you clamp down on it, see what happens? It breaks. So that's why we want to put our notch next to that node, because I don't want to be squeezing on this thing and it just snap when I needed it most. Okay, you feel good about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That dog will hunt.
All right. You feel good about that?
It'll work.
Okay.
My tender bone already.
Now, another thing you can do from the bamboo itself is you can come in and relieve a section of the bamboo to get yourself a sliver, kind of like that. And this is kind of like the welcome mat that we would use in the other methods, in that it's going to secure. See, right here's my notch. I place my tender directly behind the notch, and then I'm going to take a blade of grass, a sliver of bamboo, a leather thong, a shoelace, parachute cord, whatever you have, and hold on to it. And that's going to lock my tender into place so that it doesn't jump out. And you had a piece, well, even this straw is actually probably better, but anything flexible, blade of grass, whatever you choose to use on that. And so looking at these 2 pieces, that's kind of sharp and stabby, and this is even more stabby. And what I did here is I took my knife and I rounded those edges so they're not too terrible. And when we lock it into the ground, we're going to orient the cut directly straight up. If there were a clock here, we want this going to 12 o'clock. And then we want to lock it in, use lots of forward pressure, and this thing will invariably try to walk with you. And that's part of, as you're doing it, you'll feel a balance. It's kind of like riding a bike and maintaining that.
You want me to talk about that? Kind of, you're talking about sneaking up on it, but when you kick it back, give it a gas.
Yeah, that's another thing. As you're getting really really smoky and a lot of dust coming out, if you want to increase the friction, one trick is to just gently rotate to one side of the notch or the other and bear down for those last few strokes, and it really turns the heat up. And I'm here for moral support, and in addition to that, if I notice that the base that he sticks into the ground starts to want to twist on him, I'm going to just take my thumbs and index knuckles and I'm going to stabilize it for him. But if he were totally stranded, he would take great lengths to make sure he's really locked in. Like I said, me personally, I'd go for that hay bale or get up against a tree, then it really locks it down for you. But once you lean in, you've got to maintain that forward pressure with your body, because what's going to happen is if you slack off of that forward pressure with your body, that thing's going to start turning. And this is kind of a one and done thing. You have to start over if you fall short. Notice he's starting off nice and slow. He's just basically letting that notch fit where I cut, because they weren't made for each other yet. But by means of pressure, he's slowly making that happen. He's going to make them fit each other. And then, just like I was talking about changing gears, you start to increase your speed by degrees. And if you guys will notice, and you're welcome to come around where you can see, notice this thing's discoloring already on the sharp end. It's turning black. That's our first communication. Next thing we're going to see is smoke. I can smell it already. This thing is getting really hot really fast. And so each of those is a cue for me to speed up. See that smoke coming out? You see the ashes falling down here by the node? Now the smoke becomes more copious. Now we've got more discoloration. You know, it's kind of like you're having a conversation. It's like, hey, where are you from? I'm from Jersey. That's nice to meet you, you know. And then she scoots a little closer to you and you're like, oh, we're going to do this. It's like a communication with the wood, you know. Now sometimes your coal will get stuck in here. You might have to take a blade of grass or the tip of your knife and coax that coal out of the slit. I usually will have to take a blade to it if you feel like you need that. I have one. But it does really, it packs itself in there if you're doing it correctly.
Yeah, I need a little poker.
So you just gently depress that coal where it can fall free. And you see he has a coal there, just like with your other friction methods. And your tender's on standby, and if this were an actual emergency, the attention signal you just heard would have been followed by a pyre right here, because when we do get that flame, we need somewhere to go with that flame. So it's a super simple method, and I really love it. But this I want you to notice, guys. Look how much of that material we went through. That was for one fire, right? So do we have another fire in there? Maybe one, if you're good. And he's good, he's practiced it a lot. So yeah, we might get one more, and then we're back to square one. We're going to be making more notches. I always envision some poor caveman rubbing away at this and his wife sitting over there like this. This mastodon's not going to cook itself. There's smoke coming out of the Wilson's cave. What the hell is your problem? Sorry, I shouldn't make him laugh while he's trying to do serious shit. You know? I knew I should have married Wilson. But we were talking earlier, you know, and Josh said he gets coals out of this in like 30 seconds. How long did that take him? I mean, it's really one of the faster methods, and I tend to get coals in that same range, 30, 40 seconds. The limiting factor is we don't see bamboo everywhere, and some people even say, here you go. Some people would even say, well, why would you even learn to use a bamboo method if you don't live in Southeast Asia? How many of you go on vacations? How many of you fly on planes? You know, planes go down, you might be on a fishing trip, and all of a sudden you're on an island somewhere that has bamboo. Right across the street there is bamboo, and we're in Georgia. More and more bamboo is becoming part of our world around here. During an urban survival class one time, there was I don't know what you call it, I guess a vase, a big clay pot thingy, and it was outside next to some people's porch, and it had all these pieces of bamboo like you would buy at Pier 1 sticking out of it. And we're in an urban setting, and I was like, guys, we can make a fire with that. So we totally snagged one, you know. We ran off into the bushes, fire, you know. So yeah, bamboo's out there, and that's the method. And so I expect everybody to get a coal in about 45 seconds with this.
Really?
Yeah.
It's that easy. You can do it first time.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
The thing is, you saw how he started off, right? No big deal. Hey, how you doing? Where you from? And then the conversation heats up, and then all of a sudden, pulling your keys out. I mean, we're in here. So think of it like that. Sneak up on it. Do it by degrees.